Hey everybody, in this video I want to go over variables and levels of measurement as well as a couple of topics from our textbook. Before I get to that though, this will be a good time for me to say this real quick. Statistics is the foundation for analytics, and there's just going to be no way around that. We're going to have to learn a few things about statistics in order to be successful in this class. And I get it. For a lot of people, statistics could be really scary or just something that they think that's not for me. I'll tell you about my experience. So, back in my undergraduate days, yeah, I took courses, statistics courses. I got an A. I knew how to do the problems, but I didn't always know what they meant. Like, okay, I worked through a problem and I got a t value of 3.9, let's say. And then because of that, I rejected the null hypothesis. And then I moved on. There's really not much value to that exercise, right? Because, okay, I could do it, but what does it mean? And that's what I want to do differently in this class. Yeah, I want us to learn about statistics because, again, that's the foundation for analytics. However, even though statistics is math, that's not going to be our focus. That's what computers are for. They could do all that calculations. And, it's easy enough also to use R to produce output for us. The tough part would be actually knowing what to do with that. And it's also really the most interesting and fun part in analytics because let's get the machines to do everything for us. And then we, the humans, let's make sense out of that. And let's present this information, really highly technical information, to our marketing managers so that we can help them in making decisions for the organization. So going back to me saying, yeah, I knew how to do all the technical stuff, but what about applying it? And so that brings me to the format of this class. Yes, you have your chapter readings and your smart assignments. That can only get you so far, though. In order to learn analytics, you're going to have to, quote, get your hands dirty, right? It'll be kind of like taking a class on how to swim. It's really not going to make sense for us to read all about it and never actually go swimming. So it's going to be the same thing here. We're going to learn about statistics, analytics, and then we're actually going to work with statistical software and do some analytics work. And so in these activities, that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to provide you with the background information so that on your own, you can complete different tasks. And that's going to be the format of our class for the rest of the semester. You'll have your smart book or whatever it's called, smart assignments, and your chapter readings. But then you'll have these video tutorials to follow along so that you could complete additional analytics work. Now, one more thing before I get into data types. Even if you don't want to be an analyst, marketing analytics knowledge has career value. And that's because analytics is central to all of marketing. And for that reason, marketing executives and employers, they expect people in marketing to understand analytic techniques and how analytics are used, especially if you're going to be management. All right, so with that said, let's get into the foundational stuff. Data types. When it comes to statistics, that just didn't sound right when you say it out loud. When it comes to statistics, we're going to be dealing with data that's been captured somewhere. Recall from an earlier video that I said that whole concept of big data because we're able to capture so much information. And some data is easy enough to capture and store within databases. And that would be structured data, as you see here. But then we got unstructured data also, text, images, videos. And so for us to analyze that kind of data, we have to convert that unstructured data into structured data somehow, and then we can run analysis on them. So there's that whole concept. Now, this part, levels of measurement, data measurement, whatever, we have different types of categories there. And this is really important foundational information to know because this is where it starts. We have a lot of statistical tools available to us, but it's only going to work correctly if we identify the kind of data that we're working with. So, for example, if we have ordinal data we're working with, well, then there are statistical tools that we should not use because it's more appropriate for interval data. And the true would be this, it would be the same. It would be true the other way around. Like maybe it would be more appropriate to use a particular statistical technique on interval data versus using that same technique on ordinal data. And we have, before we even get into that, the whole concept of variables. And that's where this PDF comes in. So yeah, right now on my screen, just disregard that. I've renamed the file since I opened this. This is going to be that variables and levels of measurement PDF. So a variable, what is a variable? Well, our textbook in the next section briefly gives us a definition. Variables are characteristics or features that pertain to a person, place, or object. Like, okay, cool. Another way to think of it is it's in the name. It's anything that varies. And in stats, definitely we hear about a lot about variables, right? And in life, we hear about variables also. For example, what variables are important in a particular information? Like, what are the kind of things that would influence this? What variables? So we hear that term a lot. And I provided a few examples here relevant to marketing variables. So remember, I said a variable is anything that varies. Well, store revenue, that's an example of a variable. Store revenue would vary depending on the time of the year. It'll vary depending on location. So that varies. And then website traffic, well, that'll vary based on the time of day. That'll vary based on what page we're talking about, what web page. And then customer age, well, that will also vary because not everybody is the same age. Not all your customers will be the same age. And then customer purchase history, same thing there. Every customer is not going to be buying the same thing. Each customer will have their own purchase history that's unique to them, so it'll vary. These variables will vary within the database. And then we can further break down these variables into, so let me go back, either being numerical or categorical. Numerical data, as the name suggests, would have to do with variables that are numbers. And they could either be discrete or continuous. So discrete would be whole numbers, 1, 2, 3. And then as soon as you add decimal points to that, that would be continuous. And then the other type of variable that's not numerical would be categorical. And our textbook labels them as binary, nominal, or ordinal. And I'll tell you for this, my lecture, this video tutorial, I'm going to focus on nominal and ordinal and not really so much binary. And then we'll also go over interval and ratio. So let's do that. Let's start with nominal. Nominal would be variables that puts things into categories, and these categories have no order to it. It doesn't matter what order we put them in. It's just that they're in categories. So examples you see here are marital status. You could be single, in a committed relationship, married, or other. A person could be in any one of those categories, and there's no order to it. It's not any more important or whatever to be married or single. It's just that's just how they're listed. And then another type of nominal data would be if you were asked, what is your favorite restaurant? So we could categorize people based on their favorite restaurant. And then same thing with zip code. We could categorize people based on where they live. Now, ordinal data, that's also categorical data, but now, as the name suggests, ordinal order, there's an order to the variable. And whenever we ask people to rank, or if there's any kind of frequency questions, those would be ordinal kinds of data. So here's an example, and here's a tricky one. We'll revisit age, but for now, the way it's presented with age, so either you're 18 to 24, 25 to 39, and so on. So these are different categories, but now there's an order to it, right? 18 to 24, that's lower than 25 to 39. And then 40 to 64, that's higher than 25 to 39. So there's an order to it, but people are still going to be put into categories based on their age. And the next example of ordinal data would be ranking. So remember, I said just a minute ago, whenever we ask people to rank or offer some kind of frequency, that would be ordinal data. So if we're asking people to rank the following entrees from 1 to 3, where 1 is your favorite, yeah, this is an ordinal kind of data. And then this one, we're asking for frequency. So there's different categories of levels of frequency, and there is a particular order to it, because less than a month is less than once or twice a month. So there's an order to it. The next type of data is interval data. Now, this one's a little more difficult to explain, so I'll just jump into the examples. So whenever we're dealing with interval data, these are values measured with a rating scale. And an example would be when you see word labels at the end, and maybe sometimes in the midpoint, but like here's an example right here. How often do you take public transportation to work? So here are the word labels: never and always. So when you see something like that, that kind of data is interval. And then here's a satisfaction or a rating scale. How would you rate the quality of your laptop? So here's one label, low, and then high. And then, oh, here's the next one. I mentioned age, right? So the way it's presented here, let's go back to ordinal, is there are different categories: 18 to 24, 25 to 39, and so on. That's ordinal. Now, this one is interval, and what makes it interval is the equal spacing. So each one, like this one is less than 21, 21 to 40, 41 to 60, 61 to 80. Those are all equal. And that'll be the same concept for the other two that you saw earlier. If like it will be the same space between this and this and this and this, like we can measure that. And then also the distance between 1 and 2 is the same between 2 and 3, and so on. So the distance between 21 to 40 and 41 to 60 is the same as 41 to 60 and 61 to 80. So that's what makes it interval. And then the last example is ratio. With ratio, this is when we specify a quantity with a possibility for a true zero. So, for example, how much money do you make? Or how many hours did you sleep last night? Those kind of questions will have a true zero to it. So, those are the 4 different levels of measurement. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's really important to be familiar with what kind of data you're dealing with, because that will help you determine the right statistical tool to use in a particular situation. Okay, now we've come to the part where it's the practice problems. So this is where I would say pause the video, go through each question. So I got 1 up to number 10, and then on your own, see if you can tell what level of measurement they are. So your choices would be nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. And then when you're done, you can play the video again and we'll go through the answers. All right, so let's see. Number 1, how many of your close friends own pets? So this would be asking for a specific quantity, and it could be a true zero to it. It could be that you don't own or your friends don't own pets. So that's ratio. The second one, how many of your close friends own cars? Well, we're putting different categories depending on your answer, and there's an order to it. Some is more than very few, and many is more than some, and so on, right? So this would be ordinal. The third one, how many calls per day do you make on your cell phone? Well, okay, there's an order to it, so it's ordinal, and it might be interval, but then if you look closely, they're not the same intervals, right? It's not 16 to 20, 11 to 15, 3 to 10. That's not the same scale. So this would be an example of ordinal data. And then which cell phone service provider do you use? That's just nominal because it's going to be whatever you say it is. It's going to be a particular category. And then number 5, it has word labels where we're asking some kind of ranking. So this would be interval. Then number 6, where do you usually shop? Those are just different categories. So that's nominal. Number 7, how many times per month do you shop for groceries? That's going to be the same kind of question as number 1. It's ratio because you could put 0 on there. It's asking for a specific quantity. And then number 8, this is ranking. And whenever we ask people to rank, that's ordinal. And then number 9, okay, this one's a little tricky, right? It looks like a rating scale where it's 0 to 8. However, if you look at it closely, we are asking for a specific quantity, whether that's 0, 3, or 8 laptops. So in this case, this is ratio. And then the last one is just different categories with no order to it. So that's nominal. How'd you do? If you're not sure about any of your answers, please feel free to reach out so that we could discuss some more. Okay, let's move on. I got 2 more topics and then we'll move on to the next video. Categorical variables. Those refer to 2 levels of measurement. Remember, categories, right? So there's nominal and ordinal. And then continuous variables, those would pertain to interval and ratio. The last topic has to do with things to do before conducting data analysis. Ideally, when it comes to answering marketing questions, it's easy enough, right, to say, oh, yeah, I know, I understand that question. Let's just dive right into the data. But that's not a good idea. That's not a good practice. It's important to understand our data first and work with the limitations as necessary. We'll, in knowing our data, we'll know its limitations and we will be able to proceed accordingly. And whenever we look at data before we do any kind of analytics on it, that's called data exploration. And here are a few things that we would look at. We would look at the range. Looking at the range is important because we would know the minimum and maximum. That'll allow us to see if there are any kind of outliers to it, for example. So say you were getting ready to run data on people, and when you look at the ages of everybody in your data, you saw that somebody was 0 years old, and then somebody else on the other side, the maximum was like 1,000 years old. Well, that would be a flag for you to check it out, because if you're looking at data about customer sales order data, it's really not going to make sense in most cases for you to be looking at anybody as young as 0 years old. Like, is an infant really making purchase decisions? Yeah, probably not. And then is somebody really 1,000 years old? I guess anything's possible, but statistically speaking, that's probably not the case. It's probably some kind of error or something like that. So it's important to know these kind of things. And then the other part to look at is how much data is missing. Because if there are too many missing data points, that could invalidate your analysis. And so if you find that you have a lot of missing data, there are steps to take to mitigate that. And then also you'd want to look at the distribution. Is it symmetrical? If you recall from your other stats classes, maybe you've heard normal distribution, or is it skewed? And again, are there outliers? So those are just things to start thinking about. As we get more into statistical analysis, we will be pretty much doing the same thing over and over. Repetition, right? We're going to determine the level of measurement. We're going to do pre analysis stuff, and then we'll jump right into data analysis. But let's take it one step at a time, right? So we're doing the foundational work, and now in the next video, we're going to go back into R so that we could continue with our example.